Welcome to the training on significant incident reporting. When do I report an incident? What kind of incident gets reported, and how does the incident get reported? So let's walk through that this morning, today. Head Start regulations. In many of the other trainings we've addressed this. The performance standards are the regulations, and specifically here, again, we're still dealing with how to keep children safe. The regulation listed on the screen is 45 CFR. That used to be a form of an email that came out and transitioned into a statute. It's now 1302.102 D1 item II. It's called reporting. Now that is what you see on the screen is the law itself. A program must submit reports as appropriate to the responsible HHS or Health and Human Services official immediately as soon as practicable, related to any significant incidents affecting the health and safety of the program and participants. Circumstances affecting the financial viability of the program, breaches of personally identifiable information, or program involvement in legal proceedings, any matter for which notification or report to state, tribal, or local authorities is required by applicable law, including at a minimum. I'm going to stop there. We'll read further, but let me explain what that's saying. Any incident that we have, loss of a child, injury of a child, something that's happened that causes a risk for the health or safety of the child or our program, must be reported. Now, of course we're reporting it internally to our supervisor. Of course we're reporting it to our executive director. But our executive director must then report this to the Health and Human Services Department supervisor as soon as possible. We literally have between hours and a few days to report an incident. The incidents they're talking about are any circumstances that affect somehow the safety of the children. But watch, an incident that affects the financial viability of the program. Maybe there's a lawsuit potential, something that could cause us a risk of finances being utilized for something else. Breaches of personal identifiable information. Maybe something has happened and Social Security numbers have been stolen. It could be that we've had information that was not supposed to be communicated. Remember, in other trainings we've had, we're not supposed to communicate confidential information. Confidential information has been inappropriately communicated and it's now causing a risk for the program. It has to be reported. Anything that has to do with the legal proceeding, someone has filed a lawsuit and you know about it, we have to now make sure that we've reported that. If we have a potential, maybe there's no lawsuit filed, but we think there's a potential for one, we need to make sure that we notify HHS. If we've broken or violated some law, or the performance standards, or some other law that was violated, it has to be reported. So now let's look here. They list for us A through D, these specific items, but I've given you some explanation. But let's go through A. Any reports regarding agency staff or volunteer compliance with federal, state, tribal, or local laws addressing child abuse and neglect, or laws governing sex offenders. So anything that has to do with those items must be reported. Item B, incidents that require classrooms or centers to be closed for any reason. So any incident, maybe we had some sort of a rodent infestation and closed a classroom, something of that nature has to be reported. Legal proceedings, any party directly related to the program and operations. We heard that one already. And then item D, all conditions required to be reported under 1304.12, including disqualification of a child and adult care food program, CACFP, and license revocation. So in our particular Head Start, we also have state licensing that we comply with, and we also comply with the Federal Agricultural Grant, the CACFP. Any violations of any of those laws or regulations must also be reported. So any of these items, in the previous training I told you that if we have an employee that's not abiding by the employee handbook, not following policies and procedures, you need to self-report. That needs to be changed. certainly after addressing your coworker and saying we need to follow these rules, but we have to report this. So if something is not being done, report it to Dr. Kathy. She reports it to HHS. It's not your responsibility to report these items to the Health and Human Services Department. That is the obligation of the executive director. You are jumping way ahead and above your pay grade if you think you're supposed to report that. So do not report it yourself. You report it internally to your supervisor or your executive director, and she will take the appropriate actions. In the corresponding action following that, on the next slide, you find a program must submit reports as appropriate to the responsible HHS immediately. So we're going to do that. So let's look ahead here. The policy statement reports an investigation of the significant incidents. This is directly out of our policies in our consortium. The consortium must respond to, report, and review any and all significant incidents and/or accidents affecting the health and safety of children in order to minimize the risk of harm, ensure compliance with Head Start performance standards, and adhere to the consortium's commitment to continuous quality improvement of its operations and services. These procedures apply to all consortium employees, consultants, contractors, and volunteers. So when you see this policy statement, what we have just made a statement here is our commitment as the Elkhart and St. Joseph County Head Start Consortium. This is our commitment that we make to follow that policy or that performance standard that we read just a moment ago. We've committed that we will do all the things necessary to fulfill that statute and law to its fullest. So now when we make that commitment, we're making it on behalf of you because we're saying that you're going to comply with all of the policies and procedures necessary to fulfill that performance standard. So let's have a look at some of these significant incidents. Child injury requiring medical treatment, cuts, broken bones, chipped teeth, head trauma, etc. The question there is, would you report that incident? We'll talk about that. Look at some of these others. Inappropriate discipline, corporal punishment, isolation, withholding food, making fun of a child. Again, reportable incident. These are significant. Child abuse, maltreatment, neglect, either by a parent, guardian, or staff member volunteer. In another training, we were reminded that if we have reason to believe a child is being abused or maltreated by a parent or guardian, we are to report it. Lack of supervision, leaving a child unsupervised on or off the playground. In other words, we went through a whole process of active supervision on a previous training. If we now find that we've left a child on the playground or in a classroom unsupervised, we must report that as a significant incident. If you have or have not watched the active supervision, you'll discover that we repeat over and over how important it is to count the children, how important it is to have face recognition, how important it is to take attendance and match attendance in various locations. As you can see, if we are missing one time and we have a child that was not properly supervised, we are required by federal law to report ourselves as having had that happen. That is why we cannot have children unsupervised at any time. Unauthorized release, releasing a child from the facility or a bus without permission by the parent or guardian. There is another training on unauthorized releases, and the only possible way that you can release a child into another person who was not on a previous emergency contact list. There's a full process for getting them authorized. If you release a child to a person who has not been properly authorized, it is a violation of federal law. It is a violation of our policies and procedures, and it will place you at high risk of termination, if not at least disciplinary action. You must not release a child, whether from a classroom or from a bus, to someone who is not a parent or guardian or not on the emergency contact list. Lastly, note if you suspect a significant incident occurred, you must report it. So if you think an incident occurred, you need to report that it occurred. Even if you weren't the one that it occurred to, you need to report, hey, something happened, it needs to be reported. So How do we report? Well, let's look at this. There's a how, there's a who, and there's a when. So how are we going to report? Who are we going to report it to? And when are we going to do it? Well, let's look at this. When must a significant incident, suspected significant incident, be reported? Big words here. Immediately. We don't wait. We don't waste any time. We report it. If it's possible to report immediately due to providing supervision, you must report as soon as possible. So if it's not possible because you can't stop and make a call, you still have to do it as soon as possible. So these are the procedures that apply. Notice here at the bottom, procedures apply to significant incidents, not incidents of suspected, that are not incidents of suspected abuse and neglect. Suspected abuse and neglect must be reported to CPS, and here's the number. You see it, 800-800-5556, before taking the above steps. Okay? You've got to call them. They're first. Who's your duty? You've got to intervene if you observe conduct that may be in violation of Head Start policy. Stop it right now. Okay? If we have somebody who is not properly taking roll, not properly counting, stop it. If we have somebody who's about to release somebody in an inappropriate manner, stop it. Keep it from happening. Okay? That way we're not going to end up reporting that we didn't do something that was inappropriate or we violated our policies. So stop right there. It is your duty to stop the action if it's inappropriate. To whom do I report a significant incident, suspected incident? A significant incident or suspected significant incident must be reported immediately to your supervisor or your manager. So if we've got a violation of policy, we've got to report it. If we've got some other violation, we have to report it immediately. If that means a phone call or something direct, we've got to go from there. If your supervisor is not available, you contact Kim Bachtel, the General Services Manager, and you let her know. You let somebody above you know this had happened, this action needs to be reported. Supervisors are required to notify General Services Manager and the Executive Director, Kathy Guajardo. If you've had an incident and you're reporting it to your supervisor, it is appropriate for you to ask your supervisor, are you going to go ahead and report this to Kim Bachtel and Dr. Guajardo? See that that is being done, because ultimately Dr. Guajardo must know about this as soon as possible. ASAP, as soon as possible. Supervisors are required to notify, but always ask them. These procedures apply even if you've called CPS, and especially if you've called CPS. If you've called CPS because you believe that a child has been endangered in some fashion, whether while in your care from abuse or from someone else that you suspect, you make that phone call. That phone call, the moment you hang up, the very next thing that you do is to call the Executive Director or Kim Bachtel, and you are to call them and notify them that you've made this report. They must know, because there must be an internal investigation done as well as the external investigation. Dr. Kathy cannot be told an hour or two later, because the investigation externally has already begun, and she needs to be aware of it because she's going to hear about it. She's the first line call from Child Protective Agency. So you need to be the one who notifies her she's about to get this call. You need to be the one who tells her the details that you know, and she needs to be able to question you on whatever information she feels she needs. Do not allow her to be blindsided by receiving a phone call from Child Protective Services that she does not know that something has been reported. So how do you report an incident like this? We have an incident reporting form that has a step-by-step that asks you to follow what you know, what you've collected, what information you have, and who you've made contact with. This information report needs to be filled out because we're going to be looking at all the details as soon as possible. The report may require for you, it does require for you, to write a narrative of what you know. It requires of all other persons who were participants in the incident or who witnessed the incident to file a written narrative. If you're going to write the narrative, there is a process, and it says it on the form. Do not ask your coworker what they saw. Only write what you saw as your personal witness. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you do? Your coworker should do the same thing. As we learned in active supervision, when you're watching an incident, we discover that many people see things, hear things that the others did not see or hear. We find that some people don't see or don't hear things that someone else did. We only muddy the water when we talk to each other before we write our reports. This doesn't mean somebody's always right or wrong, but this is why you see witnesses to crimes seeing completely different stories, because your perspective is different, and what you see during the event is what you need to record. We'll sort it out in the investigation later. Your supervisor and your service manager will provide you with the significant incident reporting form. So they'll get you the form, you fill it out. It must be completed by the end of the day. You don't wait till tomorrow. This is the one incident where if you have to stay extra time to fill out the report, you must fill the report out. The information must be completed when it's at its freshest time after the incident having occurred. So see that you get the report filled out and the proper people are notified. Again, if it's Child Protective Services, they're notified first. Your executive director and also your general service manager must be notified. And you do that through your local manager, but make sure that all of it goes all the way up the channels and you filled out the proper incident report. Your incident reporting form will include the information that you shared with DFC and CPS, and you'll complete this report and you'll turn it in. So now let's have a look at some things that you might report and some things that you might not worry as much about, okay? So showing up on the screen, a child shows you a mark on their back in the shape of a handprint. What do we do with that? That seems pretty obvious. We report it. Who are we going to report it to? We're going to report it to CPS, and we're going to report it to our manager and see that the executive director knows about it. Next one, a child tells you her tummy hurts. We're going to report that? No, we're not really going to report it. It's, her tummy hurts. Maybe she needs to go potty. Maybe she's hungry, but she's not got a significant incident. Okay? A child is released from the bus without a parent at home. Okay, we're going to report that, but I'm going to tell you it should never happen. If we're following all of our policies and procedures, we should never have released a child off of the bus if there was not someone who was the appropriate person on the contact list, or parent or guardian, who was appropriate to pick them up at the bus. We should not have to report this because it should not happen. But should it happen, it is a reportable incident. A child falls off a swing and hits his head. Yeah, that's a significant incident. Well, they didn't get a goose egg. They fell off the swing. They have a potential for injury. We will report that. We'll write a report and we'll get it reported. Do we have to report it to CPS? No, but we are going to report it as a significant incident. A child is misbehaving and put in timeout. Ooh, is this a trick question? Well, we're not going to report that, but they shouldn't have been put in timeout. Remember, we don't exclude them for their behavior, but we are going to say that we're going to have to change our actions in the future. A child lightly hits a staff member or volunteer. I think the key word there is lightly, so what are we going to do? We're not going to report. Now, if you're going to get a black eye, you've got an injury, you've been whacked over the head with something, yes, you are going to report that. A child tells you his mom made him do chores. I'm not thinking that is abuse. No, we're not going to report that because a child was required to do chores. Lastly, a child scratches another child. Yes, we're going to report that. Why? Because we have a potential injury here. We've got a scratch. We've got something we have to report. So we're going to write out an incident report for that. I hope these items were helpful. What happens after I've completed an incident report? The service manager will start a prompt investigation. If the incident involves an employee's misconduct, the human resources manager will be notified and interviews will be conducted. Now you're starting to see why you write down what you know the day that you do it, because you're going to have to answer some of those same questions in an interview during an investigation. If there's any video footage that was available from any of the incident, we'll be gathering that. We'll preserve that information, review it to see what we need to learn during the investigation. The General Services Manager will notify the child's parents or guardians and appropriate specialists. Maybe we need the mental health specialist involved, the medical specialist, family services, whoever's necessary will be notified there. Remember, this is not necessarily your job. This is the job of the General Services Manager. You may have to inform the parents. Let's say if a child was scratched, you may have to inform the parents that their child was scratched, but that we're doing an investigation, and that's as far as it will need to go. If the law enforcement is required to be notified, that will be done by your General Services Manager. Your only requirement is to notify Family Services in the event that that is a requirement for the situation. The General Service Manager and Executive Director will report Family Services Administration, any regional office, to the Head Start offices or HHS. Again, those are not your roles as an employee to contact HHS to notify them of an incident. That comes from your Executive Director after a full investigation has been done, or if they need to notify prior to the investigation that we're doing an investigation, they'll do all of those proper notifications. The only time you have to notify someone outside of the consortium is if it is suspected child abuse or that you've seen child abuse, and that has to be reported by you because you're a mandated reporter. Other than that, you use your significant incident report, you report it internally, and we proceed from there. So, we now know what we should be reporting, we know who we should be reporting it to, we know how we should report it, and we know when we should be reporting it. So what happens if we don't report it? Well, there are consequences for failing to report. It could be discipline of various kinds, including up to termination. Depends on the severity of the event. Potential criminal prosecution for failure to report abuse or neglect. Remember, as a mandated reporting agent, it is criminal to be aware of or suspect abuse and not report it. And it is not criminal for the consortium, it's criminal for you because you were the one who had the suspicion and you did not report it. Most importantly, consider the purpose of reporting regulations, protect children's health and safety. That's the reason we're reporting this in the first place. If we had a near-miss incident, almost happened, and we reported, we can probably fix it. Let's say we had some trip hazard on the playground. A child tripped and fell. We don't necessarily have an injury for the child, but we're going to report the incident as a potential trip hazard, and we're going to get that repaired. Okay, seems obvious, but we're going to walk through it. If you have any questions, you'll need to submit those to your management, but there's an opportunity. If you have questions about this training, submit it to your management. Your management will get the answers, or you can consult your policies and procedures or your handbook for the Consortium Employee Handbook. Thank you for participating in this training. Look forward to see you at the next training, and you may have to sign off on a document saying that you have received this training and that you understand it. Have a great day.